is now so concentrated that 4 to 6 companies control every sector of the food system from seed to retail. So the food system is becoming increasingly concentrated in a handful of very few and very powerful giant corporations, and this is shaping the food system around the world. So the food system is becoming more concentrated in a few hands, but also more globalized. And so one of the consequences of this is the flattening or the monoculturalization of the food system globally. The diet is becoming more and more homogeneous in every country, and is becoming more and more unhealthy. To link back to the subject of this panel on health and farming. The authors of the report made this summary, which I think really captures the state of affairs with the global corporate food system today. They said, the food barons exploit workers, poison soil and water, diminish biodiversity, prevent climate justice, and perpetuate a food system structured upon racial and economic injustice. I think that says it all in many ways. Okay, so pause there, and another fact that I think is quite relevant. Today there are more than 3,000 bilateral investment treaties in effect in the world, and more than 250 free trade agreements around the world. So that's the connection here. Those are the mechanisms which are throwing open markets of every country in the world to this global corporate food system, and the reason why more and more local markets in every country are becoming dominated by the food products from the corporate food system is in large part because of these free trade agreements and this liberalization of the economy, which is driven by governments in the interests of food corporations in this case. Some of the consequences of this that I wanted to share quickly, and I think we can all see this happening. I mean, this is true in every country you go to. The global sale of packaged food, these ultra-processed junk foods basically, increased to almost $3 trillion by 2020 and is going to keep growing to about $4 trillion of sales by 2027. Soft drink sales, like the carbonated sweetened beverages, are also predicted to increase to about $2 trillion of sales by 2027. And a study last year, I think by the UN on the costs of this food system showed that the global industrial food system is the #1 cause of early death in the world. So they even though it's crude to put numbers to this kind of tragedy, they calculated that the global industrial food system costs the world $20 trillion a year. So 11 trillion of that is in health costs, 7 trillion of that is in ecological costs. So much for the argument that the industrial food system at least provides cheap food. It doesn't provide cheap food. It's costing the world $20 trillion a year. It's just that those costs are paid socially. They're socialized. So coming back to the free trade issue, there was a fascinating study. I love this statistic because it really drives the point home for me that countries which sign free trade agreements with the USA, doing that is associated with a 63% rise in the consumption of soft drinks by those countries. So basically, it's like a formula. You want your population to become unhealthy, sign a free trade agreement, not just with the USA, but that's one of the worst because that's the home country of some of the worst vectors of the spread of these so-called non-communicable diseases like diabetes, like hypertension, like heart disease, like obesity, right? Those are increasing dramatically in every country of the world, and it's because of this liberalized trade regime. And so I think more and more attention needs to be given on the role of these macro structural policies and health effects on the ground, and how the whole food system can be impacted by governments signing over treaties that basically throw open the markets to competition from global multinational corporations, right? Other examples in Vietnam, for example, when Vietnam liberalized its economy and removed regulations on foreign direct investment, within a few years the consumption of these soft drinks increased by 12%, diabetes incidence in Vietnam increased 200% and in a 10-year period, and the proportion of obese children increased almost 300% in a 10-year period. In India, of course, we have a diabetes epidemic going on, and not coincidentally, the diabetes epidemic in India corresponds to the period of liberalization of the economy, starting from 1990, yeah, diabetes rates have increased 45% in India since liberalization. So I think the reason I'm bringing all this up just because the transformation that we're talking about, I think, needs to be connected with the movements of trade unionists, the movements of the food sovereignty movement, the Via Campesina, who are simultaneously saying we need to resist this corporate liberal trade regime on the one hand. On the other hand, we need to build up these alternatives, which in many ways are revitalizing ancient systems, like have been shared already. But those systems of localized agroecological food production really face a huge challenge unless the policies also change that systematically disadvantage them and in many ways destroy those local food systems. And one of the things that drives us forward as well, besides the free trade agreements, is subsidies. This was mentioned in a previous session. Last year, a study showed that the global subsidies to fossil fuels reached $7 trillion. That's about 7% of global GDP. So again, fossil fuels are made artificially cheap by subsidies, right? And that's why global food trade is going on. Agribusiness, so like industrial agriculture, is also subsidized, about $600 billion a year. Another study showed that 90% of those subsidies are environmentally or health destructive. But the good side, which the ETC report, Food Barons, also reminds us of, and previously ECT did an amazing study called Who Will Feed Us? And they showed in that study that still today, despite this corporate global food system, 70% of the food people eat is produced by smallholder, peasant food web. They call it the peasant food web, using only 30% of the agriculture and land resources. On the contrary, the industrial food chain produces a minority of the food using the majority of the resources. So it's hugely inefficient, it's hugely subsidized. So all of those arguments about the need for industrial agriculture to feed the world are bogus, basically, because it's based on a huge system of sort of hidden supports and subsidies. And I think the more we can share about that, the better, so that because it's still very commonly thought that small-scale agroecological farming is nice. It's like a boutique thing, but it can't possibly feed everyone, right? But I think the examples we've heard from today show very clearly that that's not the case. I'll just mention a couple of examples, then finish. In addition, a study last year was looking at the Andhra Pradesh natural farming initiative of the government, and it's supposedly one of the largest agroecological initiatives in the world to transition 6 million farmers to agroecology, and it's shown to be more productive per area, more productive than corporate chemical farming. So that's one. And then moving to the north, we haven't mentioned the global north, and I think we need to mention the global north because huge amounts of the land and resources of the global south are appropriated and sort of commandeered in the production of exports to the global north, right? So if we want food sovereignty in the south and globally, we need food self-reliance north and south. Because, I mean, if anyone's been to Indonesia or flown into Kuala Lumpur, you've seen the whole landscape is palm oil plantations. And that's to produce this junk food. So you have harms on the land, harms on the body, and it's in the manufacture of exports, which has been the recipe from the globalization institutions from the beginning. Produce for export, not for self-consumption, trade, and make money, and then buy your food from the global market, right? So I think we need to really challenge that, continue to challenge that. But in the north, there are a lot of initiatives also to relocalize food systems. There's food sovereignty movement in the north, which is part of Via Campesina. in Europe, in North America, in Australia. One small example in Belgium, in the city of Liege, they have a food belt initiative, which has it's really nice because it brings together principles of economic democracy and food sovereignty. So it's a network, or it's a cooperative of cooperatives, over 200 cooperatives, hundreds of farmers involved, feeding thousands of people in this European city in Belgium. So divorcing themselves from the corporate global food system, and many such examples could be brought up from various countries. So I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been a long session. For the